Our final panel of this evening and our penultimate session, please give a warm welcome to Jessica Simor QC.
This is Sonia Purnell. Sonia Purnell has written a biography of Boris Johnson that I hope you have read or at least know about. Nick Cohen, who you'll all know from The Observer, Guardian, and I saw even The Spectator today. And Femi, we all know from OFOC. And I think Ian Dunt, who you'll also all know, is going to join us in a second too. He's being mic'd. So I'm going to actually then do a little bit of an intro because if you'll have read the question, which many of the people on the panel hadn't, it's actually rather a tricky question. Crucially, it depends on the meaning of democracy. And I certainly, for one, believe that we have arrived where we are today because Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn and others have propagated a false idea as to what democracy actually is. Essentially, they have propagated the falsity that democracy is putting a tick in a box, and that the winner takes all, and that the majority view is the only view, the view that we must honor and respect irrespective of consequences. And in my view, this has created a space. Effectively, it was a gift to Nigel Farage and his friends for them to use their winning narrative, the betrayal narrative. Democracy, of course, is much more. It involves consultation, compromise, and change, and crucially, it requires the rule of law and truth. Now, Theresa May steadfastly has refused to have any regard to the manifest and vast illegalities involved in the referendum process. And that itself really raised alarm bells for me because you would have expected in former times a prime minister to be seriously concerned by what had happened. But indeed, she wouldn't even talk about it. And then, as to truth, we require the media in a democracy and the opposition to call out lies. And the media and the opposition have sadly failed us in that regard in the last 2 years as well. And I think that is why we have arrived where we are today, where we are talking potentially about a Trump in Britain. And the subtext perhaps is Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. So I'm going to ask Sonia first, who has the greatest knowledge of all of us as to the characteristics of Boris Johnson. Lord Neuberger and Dominic Grieve both talked about the fact that democracy depends on consent and decency, and that is what essentially protects us from anarchy. So Sonia, I'm going to start with you and ask for your insight into Johnson and what, in your view, Johnson would do to enhance the standards of decency in public life.
Well, I think if you think May was bad, you probably haven't seen anything yet. Listen, I mean, Boris Johnson is a brilliant campaigner. He's a great writer. He has many gifts. Being truthful and decent are not amongst those gifts, unfortunately. I think it's right to call him a disruptor, a vandal. One of the quotes that he came out with about himself, which I think is most revealing, is that how much he enjoys the sound of breaking glass when he throws a brick into next door's greenhouse. Whether he's actually done it in real life, I don't know, but he's certainly done it in politics. He likes the sound of chaos. He likes the sound of being at the center of that chaos, having caused it, because it creates headlines. What really worries me, though, is his complete lack of believing that rules apply to him. He doesn't. He believes that he's above or behind or beside rules. They don't apply to him. And I think this is a really worrying thing. I actually really do fear him becoming Prime Minister, which it looks like he may well be in a few short months. If we look back at his record in office, if you look at when he was London Mayor, a lot of people say that he was a good mayor. I totally disagree. When he went in, he did... He did very little. He didn't even really appoint people to prominent positions. Those he did appoint, some of whom ended up with criminal convictions. Eventually, they had to parachute someone in to run City Hall for him. The chief of staff, the chief civil servant, had to take him out to dinner and tell him to start behaving like a mayor. He was told off repeatedly by the UK Statistical Authority for making up statistics suggesting that his crime initiatives were successful when they were anything but. He lashed out at the UK Statistical Authority, again another regulator without teeth, describing the man in charge as a Labour stooge. That man used to be Margaret Thatcher's private secretary, so no Labour stooge here. But you see the same old thing with Boris Johnson again and again. If you criticise him, and believe me, I've been at the receiving end of this, you are abused. Think about what he said about business the other day. Fuck business. All business did was say, you know, are you sure what you're doing is the right thing for the British economy? Does he care? No, he really doesn't. He is a sort of sole trader, if you like. He believes in the big man theory of government. He does not believe in consensus and running a cabinet as sort of the first among equals. That is not something that he believes in. He's very much in the same playbook as Trump. And then when you look at, you know, his casual relationship with truth, that really is worrying. And I'm not just talking about the £350 million thing on the side of the bus. Again and again, we've had signs of him completely distorting the truth. If you cannot think about a prime minister that what they say is broadly correct, is broadly true, you are in really, really big trouble. And if you also have a prime minister who thinks it's amusing or funny or self-aggrandizing to go around insulting foreigners, as both Boris Johnson and Donald Trump do repeatedly, that again, how are you representing your country in an efficient way? How are you making alliances and making friends? You're not. You're actually making it more difficult for your country. But also what worries me is that he doesn't really have a plan. He's not that interested in economics. I don't think he really has thought that through. I think if he does become Prime Minister, which is likely, I really wonder what he would do on his first day, what real plan he has for power, apart from getting back at his enemies, and I'm probably going to be on that list. Even his sister, Rachel Johnson, says he has a Sicilian attitude to those who've crossed him. This is not a good way to be a prime minister. This is not being a decent human being. This is not democracy as we know it and as we should know it. We are in danger of having a prime minister who holds many, many things in common with Donald Trump. It is up to all of us to call him out, to not let him get away with it. When he was mayor of London, he did. For 8 years, he left so much undone in this city that should have been tackled and remains bad and is getting worse. We absolutely cannot let him get away with it again to the country at large, particularly when we're in the sort of crisis that we're in now. Okay.
So, Nick, could I turn from the person, the individual, to the generalities, the general threats to democracy, and whether we're moving in a sort of Trump-esque route or closer to Orban, Salvini? Maybe you'd give us your view.
Yes, I mean, I imagine a Leave voter sitting in this audience would look at the title of this panel and think, well, hold on a second, what on earth are these people talking about? You know, democracy in danger. If they want to stay in the EU, win a democratic referendum. If they want their ideas to govern the country, win a general election. You know, this is just, you know, think of any cliche thrown at you, ladies and gentlemen, Ramona, whatever, snowflakery, you know, trying to pretend that losing is a threat to democracy. No, you lost. The problem with that argument and the problem with it globally is this. Across the world now, Philippines, Brazil, Hungary, Poland, America to some extent under Trump, you see people winning elections and taking that as license. It's not just what you said at the beginning, majority power, majority gets its way, minorities are trampled on. The election victory is then used, and the process is most advanced in Europe, in Hungary, a country we should really pay a lot more attention to. It's only a tiny country and no one can understand their language, but it's extraordinary what is happening there. The victory is then used to knock out all institutions that provide a check on power and scrutinize power, the media, the civil service, and the judiciary. They're all packed with loyalists. And the ideology used to justify this, and this is used by Trump, and it's used in Britain on left and right. And I want to emphasize on the left as well, because we've got two future prime ministers at the moment, Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson, and I want to make the point that the similarities between them are more apparent, more striking than the differences. And the way the argument goes is this: there is the people who are a circle of virtue. The people, even the regimes who put this forward, doesn't include everyone. They're quite happy to have enemies within. They are the 52% who voted for Remain in the case of the Brexit right. They are the believers in Jeremy, who are in the case of the left. They are Hungarians who back Orban. They are the white working class of the Midwest, whoever. And it is in their interest that government is run. Any institution, as I said, the judiciary, the civil service, the media, becomes the fake news, the lying media who are attacking the northern working class whenever we, say anything like this is all going to be the most god-awful mess. No, you are not making a normal argument in a democracy, you're not engaging in the robust debates of democracy. You are, as one of Nigel Farage's MEPs put it the other day, insulting my voters by just asking questions and putting forward arguments. Once you're inside the chosen group, which is assigned virtuous, you can do anything. In the Labour Party now, you can sexually abuse women, you can be as racist as you like against Jews, but if you are inside, then not only are you protected, the criticisms against you are always tainted. You are doing this because you're furthering the agenda of big business, or in the case of J.K. Rowling, because you don't want to pay more tax, which is ludicrous, as Joe moved to Scotland where you pay more tax, or because you're a Jew, or whatever. In the case of the right, and we saw this right from the start in the referendum campaign, when organizations like the Institute of Fiscal Studies, I don't know how many people here know this, it is crushing in its objectivity. I feel, you have to have all gaiety and life removed to you to even think of working for the Institute of Fiscal Studies. It is so proper. Queen Victoria would have thrown up her hands in horror and gone and taken some drugs. But even the Institute of Fiscal Studies, as soon as it started saying, look, these sums don't add up, this isn't true, no, you're financed by the EU. Yeah. And we've gone from that small beginning in the referendum to it's a Remainer parliament secretly conspiring against the wishes of the people. We've had Lord Newberg, I think he was sort of right in the way when he said the attack on the judiciary is enemies of the people was sort of a one-off. The attack on the civil service has been relentless. Incidentally, on named civil servants, it is so bad that when Sir Ivan Rogers was driven out, he had to give a warning to civil servants to say, I'm really sorry, your job is to lay out the hard truths for politicians. What they decide to do with them is up to them. You have no political, but you have to tell the truth. And I wonder at the moment how many civil servants are. Certainly, Sir Ivan worried when he was fired it was to pour encourage Leotra to bite their tongue and not raise awkward questions. Now, it strikes me that if either, I would say, incidentally, before slagging off all politicians, most politicians in the Labour and the Tory parties and the parties in between are not remotely like that. The British Conservative Party is not like Trump's Republicans. It may go that way as UKIP people come in, or ex-UKIP, but it's not that. Dominic Grieve may be an exception on the left of the party, but most Conservative MPs are like that. Most Labour MPs are like Stephen Kinnock, who was here a minute ago. They are not, they haven't got this weird post-Marxist, neo-Stalinist mentality. But that will change. But as things stand, our next Prime Minister will come from either of those cultures. The question then arises is what to do. And I go back to where I started. The point about democracies is to win. If you're beaten, you retreat, you try and learn some lessons from it. You try and accept, incidentally, which I hope, I don't always believe, I hope the People's Vote campaign is doing, you accept where you were wrong. You don't always say, oh, it was a biased media that made people do that, or it was Facebook, or it was blah, 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 blah. However true those statements may be, except we made mistakes. If you lose in a democracy, you have to regroup, and I hope the People's Vote campaign do that. As for the rest of us, if you're a Green Party, Liberal Democrat, or Change supporter, are there any Change supporters left, by the way? But assuming there still are, if you're one of those, you absolutely insist that your parties, that Remain parties, reach electoral pacts, and with Plaid Cymru in Wales as well, and with the SNP in Scotland. You never allow again the absurdity of the European elections, where Nigel Farage was given a free run with a clear message, and all the rest of us were sitting there with calculators trying to work out the whole voting system, saying, well, should we vote Green? Should we vote Lib Dem? You say to your politicians, you say this is a national crisis. You say this is the biggest issue we're facing in our lifetimes. Will you damn well behave like that? And you damn well work together. If you're in the Labour Party, please, for God's sake, can you just get rid of a wretched man and get a proper leader of the opposition who actually opposes? And if you're in the Tories, I don't know, Ian and I have talked about this before, about how the cliches that come out of 2016. All the people who are forgotten, and I'm from the north of England, all the people in the north of England who voted Remain are now entirely wiped out and replaced by a guy in Bury Market. There were 3 million Tories, 4 million Tories who voted Remain.
I'm gonna, okay. Because I'm getting
Make your voices
getting
heard
signals.
as well.
So I'm going to turn to you, Femi, and ask you about our democratic structures, our constitutional structures, and can they provide some kind of protection against some narcissist who takes us down a crazy route?
So I see Donald Trump as a beast in a cage. And that cage is the American Constitution. And his presidency has shown us the strengths and weaknesses of that cage. So when he was elected, he wanted to do his blanket Muslim ban, but he got beaten down by the Constitution. So there were barriers in place, checks and balances. And he then managed to get it through somehow, but the point was, we got to see where the weaknesses were. He started using executive orders because that was a weakness in the Constitution which allowed him to do what he wanted. The UK, well, I mean, Donald Trump obviously can use the Constitution the wrong way, which allows him to say phrases like, schools are gun-free zones, which makes them very dangerous places. But having a Constitution provides safety. The UK doesn't have a written Constitution. At law school, they refer to the UK's constitution as a set of understandings which nobody understands.
Yeah, and Neuberger said they make it up as they go along.
Yeah, and as a result of that, Parliament can do anything. Parliamentary sovereignty means Parliament can do anything. And you yourself have said in the past that for the past 40 years, the EU treaties have been our constitution. They've been the thing that, all right, we have rules, EU treaties and also the Human Rights Act via the Convention on Human Rights, rules which mean that there are limits on what government can do to the people. And we are now in a situation where when Boris Johnson gets coronated as unelected Prime Minister, he, with the Tory majority and the DUP, who have a majority over Parliament, an absolute majority when you combine the two, can take us out of the EU without a deal, even though in 2017 the majority of voters voted for parties whose manifestos explicitly opposed no deal.
Well, you may have heard Ken Clark saying on the Today programme that led some suggestion that she would just ignore Parliament. A motion in Parliament was a constitutional outrage. And as a lawyer, I immediately thought, yeah, and so what? Constitutional outrage, outrageous. But I mean, what would you say about that? Do you think there is some kind of solution in there? Is there going to be some system which will kick in?
I think it's going to require the Speaker to help us out, to make sure that whatever the Parliament does to try and stop Boris Johnson just throwing the country off a cliff, we'll need his help. But like I said, the fact that it's even possible that we could be let out of the EU without a deal, even though the Parliament as it currently stands was voted in by people who chose manifestos who explicitly ruled out no deal, is a constitutional outrage. Yeah. And it's partly aided by the fact that we have a first-past-the-post system, which obviously needs to go, because if it was done more proportionally, we'd get a better representation.
And we have an unelected president in a prime minister.
Yeah, exactly. And that is extremely dangerous. And the fact that we've got a very real risk that there ends up being a pact between Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage for power, and we've already seen the direction that he wants to take when he, during a referendum largely about European migration, he found it appropriate to use people from Syria who had nothing to do with Brexit. We've already seen the sort of direction that he wants to take the country, and there'll be very little to stop him because he's obviously very, very opposed to the Human Rights Act. Boris Johnson is opposed to the economic and social rights which are available under the EU. We have people that don't really have the same values as the UK about to be put in a lot of power.
Thank you. So, Ian, there is an argument that Trump is already here, and that, you know, Brexit and Trump, and it's all this part of the same. And perhaps you could give us your view on that, and also on how we're going to get out of this mess.
Yeah. I mean, look, Brexit is Trump. And not just that, but look, Theresa May was so shit at it that you couldn't tell that she was following the Trump playbook. But she followed it. She followed it instantly. She comes in, she talks about the will of the people as often as she can, thwarting the will of the people, the imaginary will of the people that you pointed out, the thing that cannot exist, because the people are not a homogeneous lump. They are a collection of individuals with different views. She attacks institutions. She ended her time attacking Parliament itself for daring to oppose her in the first place. She called a general election because the opposition and the Lords were opposing her, again, the functioning of a sort of stable government, of a decent system. During the election, in a way that we forget now, she accused the EU of meddling in British affairs. All the time, this attitude of the people are under attack, the people are pure, the opposition we must face, therefore can only be explained via a conspiracy theory that originates by aliens and outsiders, whether it's the Lords, whether it's foreigners, whether it's the opposition, whether it's MPs themselves. So she did it. It was just that she was so dull that you couldn't continue to pay attention to her doing it. There was no charisma. But she was still pursuing that playbook. Now, the danger then is that we get someone like Boris Johnson or someone like Nigel Farage who's better at it, who is more emotionally articulate, who is able to channel those things wider. And part of the solution is, of course, the way the Constitution operates, the way the institutions operate. But a lot of the solution to this stuff is simply the way that we function as people, the way that we resisted ourselves. Now, part of that is when you spot a politician who was using emotions without any policy behind them, without any actual rationality, without any evidence behind them, you know that you have a demagogue that just wants to exist now. And that is exactly where we are with Farage. This is different to using emotions in an argument that is still anchored down with evidence. When all it is emotions, they are trying to find a way of escaping scrutiny. So when they elect them, people have elected Nigel Farage in the European Parliament, how the fuck do you know what he's going to do? How can you hold him to account? Because he never told you what he was going to do. All he ever said was national humiliation, enemies within and without, I will fix it. The second part is standing up to this, and there's really no more important thing to do as an individual, is you notice that they always go for minorities. Every time. What is the connection between Trump in America, between Orban in Hungary, Salvini, the Brexit vote? Immigrants. It's always the immigrants that they go for, whether it's the Mexicans, whether it's refugees coming in, whether it's freedom of movement. Over and over across the world, the other in every one of these situations is immigrants. And the key to fixing this thing, to standing up to these people, is you stand up for immigrants as rule one.
Well,